Hey there, and welcome to Mr. Crimeshow. Tonight, I've got a 2-hour compilation of chilling true crime stories, full of twists and turns that will keep you hooked, all set against the soft sound of rain in the background, creating the perfect atmosphere to help you relax, unwind, and drift off to sleep. If you enjoy our work, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. The story of Bella Fontanelle. 6-year-old Bella Elena Fontanelle was a bright kindergartner at St. Matthew the Apostle School in River Ridge, Louisiana. She was the kind of child who could light up a room with her smile, who loved princesses and playing dress-up, and who brought joy to everyone around her. On Tuesday, April 25, 2023, this precious little girl tragically passed away due to the harmful actions of someone who should have protected her. Her father's girlfriend, Bunnack, Hannah Landon, took away the future Bella could have had. Bella's story begins with a family trying their best to navigate the complexities of separation and shared custody. Her parents, Michael Fontanelle and Jennifer Zeledon, had met in college, where both earned degrees in accounting and became certified public accountants. Though they never married, they remained together for several years and were blessed with 2 beautiful daughters. Bella was the youngest at 6 years old, with an older sister named Aria who was 7. After Bella's birth, Michael and Jennifer's relationship came to an end, leading to a difficult separation. Despite their personal struggles, both parents were committed to maintaining a stable environment for their daughters. They established joint custody arrangements and made the thoughtful decision to live close to each other in the safe, neighborly community of Harahan, Louisiana. Their homes were only 1 block apart, which would eventually allow the girls to walk between their parents' houses as they grew older. 2 years after Michael and Jennifer ended their relationship, Michael began dating Bunnack Lim, who also went by the names Hannah Landon and Bunnack Landon. At the time of the tragedy, Michael and Bunnack had been together for more than 4 years. Bunnack had a son of her own who lived in Florida, though little was known about that relationship or her past life. There were claims that she had once had a family that she had since left behind. When Bunnack moved into the home Michael shared with his daughters on Donlon Drive, she assumed the role of stepmother. However, those close to the family began to notice concerning behaviors. Bunnack displayed unusual characteristics regarding Bella and Aria, particularly an intense jealousy toward Jennifer. She made it a point to present herself, Michael, Bella, and Aria as a tight unit, often going to the extreme of dressing identically to the children for all sorts of occasions, not just holidays. Friends of the family found this behavior strange, especially since Bunnack wasn't the girl's biological mother and Jennifer remained very much involved in their lives. Michael's mother, Barbara Fontanelle, wasn't fond of Bunnack, and his side of the family found her to be strange and unsettling. Despite being with Michael for several years, no one felt like they really knew her. Bunnack didn't have a social media presence and didn't work outside the home, living as a homemaker of sorts. It's believed she originally emigrated to the United States from Thailand, though this hasn't been confirmed. As the months passed, the tension between Bunnack and Jennifer escalated into concerning confrontations. On June 8, 2021, during a children's swim meet at the Riverside Country Club in Harahan, a physical altercation occurred that would later be documented in court records. Jennifer had approached her daughters to hug them and congratulate them on their performance when Bunnack intervened, making a scene about it being Michael's custody day, despite their joint custody arrangement. Michael agreed to let Jennifer hug her daughter for 1 minute, but Bunnack took out her cell phone to record the interaction. When Jennifer's sister, Evelyn Zeledon, told Bunnack to stop recording, Bunnack slapped Evelyn's hand. After Evelyn told her never to do that again, Bunnack pulled her hair. The situation escalated until a bystander intervened and police were called. Court documents described Bunnack as being extremely uncooperative during police interviews, persistently blaming Jennifer and Evelyn, who had visible signs of struggle. Bunnack refused to provide officers with information until she was threatened with charges and ultimately received a municipal summons for simple battery. In response, Bunnack filed a temporary restraining order against Jennifer, citing several claims, including another alleged altercation on March 17, 2021, during a children's soccer game. She claimed Jennifer had approached her, grabbed her by the arm, and threatened her. However, the temporary restraining order was dismissed by Judge Faulkner of the 24th Judicial District Court on August 5, 2021, as there were no grounds to verify Bunnack's claims. During this turbulent period, those closest to Bella began noticing concerning changes in the little girl's behavior and emotional state. Bella had started expressing to her teachers at St. Matthew, the Apostle School, that Bunnack was unkind to her. Educators documented daily crying spells, anxiety, and distress at the thought of having to go home with her father, where Bunnack also lived. The school staff recorded instances of Bella's emotional struggles, noting her fear and reluctance about returning to that environment. Bella was eventually referred to counseling, where she continued to voice her concerns, repeatedly telling her therapist that Miss Hannah is mean to me. However, she never provided specific details about any harm. Her older sister would later testify that it was obvious to her, even at her young age, that Bunnack treated Bella more harshly than others. Teachers from St. Matthew, the Apostle who taught Bella, confirmed that she was struggling both academically and emotionally, often crying and saying she didn't want to go to her dad's house. The situation reached a critical point during Bella's final counseling session on April 24, 2023, just one day before her life was taken. During this session, Bella told her father that Landon was unkind to her. When he sought clarification from his daughter, she became uncommunicative, as if she was too afraid or overwhelmed to explain further. On the evening of April 25, 2023, Bella and her older sister were in Bunnack's care while their father worked late. Michael, a certified public accountant, was busy during tax season and didn't return home until about 10:30 that night. The children's paternal grandmother had picked up the girls from school and spent the afternoon with them before dropping them off at their Harahan home around 7:30 p.m. It was soon after the grandmother left that prosecutors say Bunnack committed a devastating act. According to evidence presented at trial, prosecutors discovered a video on Bunnack's cell phone that she had hidden, showing Bella in distress. The footage captured the little girl crying in her bedroom, repeatedly saying through tears, "I want my grandma." In response to Bella's cries, Bunnack placed a bath towel at the bottom of the bedroom door to muffle the sound. This evidence would later become crucial in understanding the final moments of Bella and Bunnack's actions. At approximately 9:30 p.m., surveillance video captured Bunnack pulling a wagon carrying a bucket in which she had placed Bella. The footage shows her walking with an eerie calmness, dressed in a red-orange blouse, black pants, and white knee-high boots, as if she was simply transporting groceries. She pulled the wagon one street over to Bella's mother's home and left the bucket at the foot of the driveway before returning home with an empty wagon. Minutes after Bunnack returned, Michael arrived home from work, exhausted from his long day. He fell asleep on the living room couch and didn't notice that Bella and Bunnack were missing until the following morning. When he woke up on Wednesday, April 26, and realized they weren't home, he went to the Harahan Police Department around 7:30 a.m. to report them missing. His report triggered an Amber Alert and launched a massive police search for the child and woman. As part of the search efforts, police visited the home of Bella's mother, Jennifer Zeledin, around 8:30 a.m. It was there that Bella's maternal grandmother became the first to find the bucket on the front lawn. Bella's mother and father arrived moments later with police officers. When a police sergeant removed the bucket's lid, they discovered Bella had tragically lost her life. The Jefferson Parish Coroner's Office later determined that Bella had lost her life due to asphyxia and other trauma. The pathologist noted signs of distress and marks indicative of a struggle with Bunnack. Perhaps most heartbreaking of all, the autopsy revealed that Bella may have still been alive, although unconscious, when Bunnack placed her in the bucket. Bunnack was located around 2 p.m. at a local hospital. She had walked to the Harahan Police Department the night before in a disoriented state and requested transportation to the hospital. Initially, she turned herself in but was uncooperative with officers. She was taken to a hospital for a mental evaluation before being arrested and booked into the Jefferson Parish Correctional Center on charges of first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. When Bunnack's case went to trial in April and May 2025, the courtroom became a place where Bella's family could finally seek justice for their beloved little girl. The 4-day trial began on Tuesday, April 29, 2025, almost exactly 2 years after Bella was found. Family members who had been waiting for this moment filled the courtroom, determined to see justice served for the innocent child they had lost. During the trial, prosecutors painted a clear picture of Bunnack's deliberate actions and state of mind. They presented evidence showing that after causing Bella's death, Bunnack had searched for a criminal defense attorney's trial preparation services on her phone and sent cryptic messages to those close to her. Authorities also found evidence linking Bunnack to the case, including testing that connected material found on the outside of the bucket to her. Bella's father, Michael Fontenelle, took the stand and provided emotional testimony about the difficulties in his relationship with Bunnack. He told the jury that Bella had mentioned during counseling sessions that Bunnack was mean to her. His voice broke with emotion as he described the devastating day when Bella's loss was discovered. Bella's mother also testified, sharing the pain of watching her daughter's daily struggles. She spoke about Bella's frequent tears in pre-K and how she often returned home feeling upset and afraid. The testimony painted a picture of a little girl who was living in fear, trying to navigate a situation that no child should ever have to face. Perhaps one of the most poignant moments came when Bella's 9-year-old sister took the stand. Despite her young age, she was able to articulate to the court how close she and Bella had been as sisters. She testified that it was obvious to her that Bunnack treated Bella more harshly than others, showing that even a child could see the unfair treatment her little sister was enduring. Teachers from St. Matthew, the Apostle School, also provided crucial testimony. They described Bella as a child who was struggling academically and emotionally, often crying and expressing that she didn't want to go to her father's house where Bunnack lived. They testified that Bella would say Bunnack was mean to her and would hurt her feelings, providing a window into the daily fear this little girl was experiencing. A therapist who had been working with Bella testified that the girl had consistently expressed the same concerns in their sessions. This professional testimony helped establish a pattern of Bella's distress and fear regarding Bunnack, showing that her concerns were ongoing and serious enough to warrant professional intervention. Throughout the trial, Bunnack's defense team never attempted to deny her involvement. Instead, they pursued a not guilty by reason of insanity plea, arguing that due to mental illness, Bunnack did not know right from wrong. They called a forensic psychiatrist to testify, who had evaluated Bunnack 13 times. This psychiatrist described Bunnack's traumatic childhood that began in a Khmer Rouge death camp in her native Cambodia and involved a physically abusive father. The psychiatrist testified that she could not conclusively say whether Bunnack knew right from wrong at the time of the incident. However, the prosecution effectively countered this defense by bringing in their own forensic psychologist. This expert testified that it was her opinion that Bunnack understood the consequences of her actions at the time. The psychologist described how Bunnack acted normally on the day of the incident and made deliberate decisions, including hiding her phone and interacting with authorities. When given the opportunity to testify on her own behalf, Bunnack declined. The judge asked her if she planned to take the stand, and after some back and forth, she ultimately invoked her Fifth Amendment right and refused to testify. During closing arguments on May 1, 2025, Assistant District Attorney Rachel Africk delivered a powerful statement that captured the prosecution's view of the case. "This isn't a woman who is outside her faculties," Africk told the jury. "This is a woman who made deliberate and harmful choices." These words resonated with the evidence that had been presented showing a defendant who had acted intentionally. The jury deliberated for less than 1 hour before reaching their verdict. Just before 7 p.m. on May 1, 2025, they found Bunak, Hannah, Landon guilty of first-degree murder and 2 counts of obstruction of justice. When the verdict was announced, Bella's family members who were sitting in the courtroom became visibly emotional. Many of them had been present since opening arguments began, waiting for this moment of justice for their beloved Bella. On Tuesday, May 6, 2025, Bunak appeared before a Jefferson Parish judge for sentencing. The courtroom was filled with those who loved Bella, finally seeing the conclusion of a legal process that had been nearly 2 years in the making. The judge sentenced Bunak to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder conviction. Additionally, she received 80 years for obstruction of justice. The district attorney had elected not to seek the death penalty, making life in prison the maximum possible sentence. The loss of Bella Fontenelle represents more than just a single tragedy. It stands as a heartbreaking reminder of how those entrusted with a child's care can betray that sacred responsibility in the most devastating way. Our hearts go out to her family, who continue to grieve the loss of a beautiful little girl whose life was filled with so much promise and love, and whose memory will forever be cherished by those who knew her bright spirit. The story of Lisa Home. She had dreams of studying abroad in Australia. Lisa Home, a bright 17-year-old from Skövde, Sweden, was defined by those who knew her as kind, lively, positive, and loving. She was a young woman who treasured her independence and helped others whenever she could. Her family remembers her as someone who was always fond of traveling and looked forward to exploring the world beyond her small Swedish hometown. Lisa had always been eager to earn her own money and build her future. In the weeks leading up to June 7, 2015, she had started working at a cafe in Blomberg, about 40 minutes away from her home in Gertin municipality. Since this was the first time Lisa was working so far from home, her parents made sure to drive her to and from work each day. They wanted to ensure their daughter's safety and provide peace of mind for themselves. But Lisa was growing more confident about her independence. On that Sunday morning of June 7, 2015, Lisa felt ready to make the journey on her own. After weeks of being driven to work by her parents, she asked if she could take her mope to the cafe instead. Her parents, seeing how responsible and mature she had become, agreed to let their daughter travel independently for the first time. It was supposed to be a milestone moment, a step toward the adulthood Lisa was so eager to embrace. Lisa arrived at the cafe that morning and worked her shift as usual. Her co-workers remember her as a dedicated and cheerful employee who brought positive energy to the workplace. She was planning to finish her work and ride her mope home, just as she had told her parents she would. But as evening approached and Lisa prepared to leave work, her family's world was about to change forever. When Lisa failed to return home that evening, her parents immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't like their daughter, who was responsible and always kept in touch. They contacted the police, and a massive search effort began almost immediately. The local community rallied together, understanding that every minute counted when a young person goes missing. The search teams worked tirelessly through the next several days. On Tuesday, June 9th, they found Lisa's cell phone case, receipts, tickets, and similar personal items that were identified as belonging to her. These discoveries gave the family hope that they were on the right track, but also filled them with growing dread about what might have happened to their daughter. By Wednesday, June 10th, the search area was extended, and the Swedish version of the organization Missing People was called in to help. That day brought more heartbreaking discoveries. A pair of earrings that belonged to Lisa was found in a barn near the cafe where she worked. Her license card for her mope and her house keys were also recovered. Each item found was another piece of evidence that something terrible had occurred. The breakthrough came on Friday, June 12th, when Missing People volunteers decided to search the Martorp estate, located a few kilometers from the cafe. As they conducted their search, 2 people arrived by car and told them that the area had already been searched. The missing people representatives found this suspicious and immediately called the police. Despite being told to leave, they continued their search and discovered Lisa's jacket and helmet. That same evening, their worst fears were confirmed. Lisa was found in a workshed nearby. The discovery ended the intense 5-day search, but began an even more painful journey for Lisa's family. The young woman who had dreamed of traveling the world and studying in Australia would never come home again. The investigation that followed revealed distressing details about Lisa's final moments. The county court determined that she had lost her life due to the actions of someone who subjected her to serious harm. The evidence pointed to a crime that had taken place in a barn opposite the cafe where Lisa worked. This was where she had been lured, overpowered, and lost her life before being moved to the workshed where she was eventually discovered. The person responsible for Lisa's tragic end was identified as Neregius Bilavicius, a 35-year-old Lithuanian citizen born on March 3, 1980. Technical evidence was overwhelming against him. DNA belonging to Bilavicius was found on pieces of rope and on 10 different pieces of Lisa's clothing, both inside and outside the garments. His genetic material was scattered throughout the crime scene. Police investigations revealed that he had no alibi for the day Lisa disappeared. The motive behind Lisa's tragic end was determined to be of a disturbing nature. Investigators found inappropriate material on Bilavicius's computer, and technical findings indicated that he had behaved inappropriately at the location where Lisa was found. His actions when missing people volunteers first arrived at Martorp also indicated that he desperately wanted to prevent police from searching that particular area. As the trial began on October 27, 2015, Lisa's family faced the unimaginable task of sitting in a courtroom with a man accused of causing her death. Prosecutor Lars Göran Wennerholm presented the case to the Skaraborg District Court, asking for Bilavicius to be held responsible and then expelled from the country. The prosecutor painted a chilling picture of what had happened to Lisa. He parked his car here, called over Lisa home while she was starting her mope to ride home. He got her into a barn and then caused her death. After that, he went back and fetched his car, drove around the barn, moved her to the car, and drove towards Martorp's farm, the prosecutor told the court. The courtroom was filled with tension as Lisa's mother, father, and sister sat face to face with the accused. Swedish radio reporter Mats Erfström described the scene. The family was in the court, and they sat eye to eye with the suspect, the 35-year-old man. He all the time looked down in the floor or at the table. He didn't meet their looks. The father of Lisa home, most of the time, sat and watched the man. While the prosecution had some witness statements, their primary evidence was forensic. Lisa's jacket contained evidence from both her and the suspect, providing crucial proof of contact between them. The defense attorney, Inger Rönnbeck, argued that police had been too quick to identify her client as responsible. She pointed out that he had been the one to find a glove that was important to the investigation, reasoning that a guilty person would have disposed of it rather than bringing it to police attention. During the trial, a particularly chilling piece of testimony came from a female jogger who had encountered Bilavicius the day before Lisa disappeared. The woman testified that a man matching his description had stopped her while she was running and asked for directions, requesting that she get into his car to help guide him. The woman's instincts told her something wasn't right, so she refused and continued jogging. When this witness saw Bilavicius in court, she positively and confidently identified him as the same man who had approached her. Lisa's family was represented by attorney Tor Brantler, who claimed damages totaling 150,000 Swedish krona. Brantler told the court that 17-year-old Lisa was a shy girl who must have been lured into the barn opposite the cafe where she worked. He expressed the family's desperate need for answers, saying they were plagued by a difficult question about why this had happened, and that only one person can answer. He added, "You can say that it would be good for the family if the answer could be given in this trial. The court traveled to the crime scene during the proceedings, with the family following in a police car. However, they chose not to leave the vehicle to see the barn where their daughter had lost her life. It was too painful for them to witness the place where Lisa's dreams had come to such a tragic end. Throughout the 5-day trial, Lisa's family showed remarkable strength. I'm quite impressed by the family of Lisa Home, who have been sitting there for 5 days and haven't lost their concentration, being calm, just listening. Just the fact that they can be there for 5 days is quite strong, reporter Erfström told Radio Sweden. In a surprising turn, on the final day of the trial, Balevicius's wife, who had been interrogated several times during the investigation and had previously refused to testify, changed her mind. She briefly testified over the phone with the help of a translator, supporting her husband's version that he was at home when the incident occurred. However, her testimony was not enough to overcome the overwhelming physical evidence against him. The family's attorney emphasized that there was a disturbing motive behind Lisa's tragic end. There was no normal intimate contact, but they think there is inappropriate behavior in the background. A very strange, inappropriate behavior, Erfström explained to Radio Sweden. On November 17, 2015, the verdict was finally delivered. The circumstances were considered especially serious by investigators because Lisa was only 17 years old and physically weaker than Balevicius. The court noted that he showed great ruthlessness and intent. Police stated that Lisa had suffered before finally losing her life at the scene. Balevicius was sentenced to life imprisonment, which in Sweden typically amounts to about 25 years in practice, followed by deportation with no chance of return to the country. The defense attorney, Björn Hurtig, filed an appeal with the court on April 15, 2016. His reasons for appealing included claims that someone else might have helped commit the incident or moved Lisa, potentially involving the convict's wife. However, on May 2, 2016, the Court of Appeals declined to grant a new review or trial, making his life sentence final. The case that had captivated Sweden was finally closed legally, but the pain for Lisa's family would continue indefinitely. Their daughter, who had dreamed of independence and traveling to Australia, had lost her life on the very first day she had been allowed to make the journey to work on her own. The story took another tragic turn years later. On August 3, 2022, Balevicius was found with a fatal wound to his neck while on a walk in prison. He did not survive and passed away on his way to the hospital. Fellow inmates had taken justice into their own hands, but for Lisa's family, this brought no real comfort. They had hoped he would serve his full sentence and face the consequences of his actions for decades to come. Lisa Holmes' story touched the hearts of people across Sweden and beyond. She was a young woman full of life and dreams, someone who wanted to help others and explore the world. Her family had nurtured her independence and supported her goals, never imagining that allowing her to ride her mope to work would lead to such an unthinkable tragedy. The loss of Lisa Home serves as a heartbreaking reminder of how quickly a life full of promise can be taken away. Our thoughts remain with her family, who showed incredible strength throughout the investigation and trial, and who continue to carry the memory of their beloved daughter, sister, and friend. Lisa's dreams may have been cut short, but her story will not be forgotten, and neither will the loving, kind, and positive young woman she was. The story of Loretta Saunders. Loretta Barbara Grace Saunders was born on August 25, 1987, in Happy Valley Goose Bay, Newfoundland and Labrador, to Miriam Teriak and Clayton Saunders. She was the fifth child in a large, loving, blended family that welcomed everyone with open arms. Her mother Miriam worked as a secretary at a fish producers co-op, while her father Clayton worked as a storeman at the local Air Force base. Loretta was Clayton's first daughter, and he called her his proper Princey. The family was deeply rooted in their Inuk heritage, with Miriam being Inuk and Clayton of mixed Inuk and European descent. The Saunders household was always bustling with activity. Miriam and Clayton had a reputation for opening their doors to anyone who needed help, especially people from the Aboriginal community who were down on their luck. Over the years, they took in dozens of foster children who squeezed onto bunk beds or slept on couches. Every meal was like a production line, with 10 to 12 people sitting down together. The children worked as a team, chopping wood and cleaning up after meals. Summers were filled with family trips to the beach, all of them packed into their tan safari van, singing hymns along the way. In those early years, they had no television, so at night they would go frog catching, driving up and down the road until their headlights spotted a frog, which they'd bring home and put in a kiddie pool. Loretta would screech before she touched one. She honestly believed she was a princess and loved dolls and looking in the mirror. As Loretta grew older, her path took some difficult turns. After an alleged incident of harm at her school, she left her studies and moved to Montreal, where she lived on the streets and faced challenges related to substances. This period of her life was dark and challenging, but Loretta's resilience eventually shone through. She was determined to change her life and make something of herself. She returned to Labrador, worked hard to overcome her dependency, and finished her grade 12 education. Her father, Clayton, later said she was going to make a change in things, and she had done a pretty good job in her little, short life. After completing high school, Loretta was accepted into St. Mary's University in Halifax to study criminology. She had big dreams of continuing her education and attending law school after graduation. At university, she found her calling in advocacy work, particularly focusing on issues affecting Indigenous women. Loretta began working on her graduate thesis about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, MMIWG, a topic that was deeply personal to her. She talked to women, politicians, and police chiefs about the issue, determined to bring attention to this crisis. However, her graduate funding for this important project was not approved. To cover her expenses while continuing her studies, Loretta made the decision to rent out space in her Halifax apartment. Her family was worried about this choice. Her mother Miriam later said they had warned Loretta against taking in boarders or roommates, but she didn't listen. Miriam explained that Loretta was used to being able to trust others back in Labrador, and it was her nature to want to help people. She didn't let her family know about her plans to sublet her apartment. In January 2014, through a Kijiji advertisement, Loretta found 2 people to sublet a room in her Halifax apartment, Blake Leggett and Victoria Henneberry. The couple answered her ad and moved in, but it wasn't long before tensions began to arise. Leggett and Henneberry were experiencing serious financial difficulties and were consistently late with rent payments or couldn't pay at all. They owed Loretta around $600, and she had reached her limit with their excuses and delays. By February 2014, the situation had become untenable. Loretta had asked the pair to leave the apartment after months of not receiving rent or receiving it late. The couple was desperate to leave Halifax, but had no money to do so. It was during this time that something concerning began to take shape in Blake Leggett's mind. According to court documents that would later emerge, Leggett hatched a plan that was both deliberate and dangerous. He intended to harm Loretta, take her car, and flee the province with Henneberry. Victoria Henneberry knew about his plans. At the time of these events, Loretta was not just fighting for justice through her academic work. She was also carrying new life. She was expecting her first child with her boyfriend of 2.5 years, Yalcin Circletay. The pregnancy added another layer of hope and future to her story, making what was about to unfold even more tragic. February 13, 2014, started like any other day, but it would become the date that changed everything. Around 11 a.m. that morning, Loretta went to her apartment to collect the overdue rent from Leggett and Henneberry. When she arrived, Henneberry lied to her, claiming she had lost her bank card and needed to call the bank. In reality, the couple simply didn't have the money they owed. Loretta sat on the couch in the living room, patiently waiting for them to sort out the payment issue. What happened next was a premeditated act that shocked everyone who later learned the details. According to the agreed statement of facts that would eventually be presented in court, Loretta was subjected to fatal harm in her apartment. Despite her efforts to protect herself, she was overpowered. Following this, her remains were concealed inside a hockey bag. Afterward, the living room was tidied up as if nothing had occurred. Leggett then carried the hockey bag containing Loretta's remains out of the building and placed it in the trunk of her own car. The couple then packed up their belongings and fled the province in Loretta's vehicle. Their disregard didn't end there. They stopped along the way to buy food and supplies using her bank card. While Loretta's family and police were desperately searching for her, Henneberry continued to lie about her whereabouts. She even used Loretta's cell phone to send text messages to her boyfriend Yalcin, pretending to be Loretta. The couple drove approximately 300 miles away to New Brunswick, where they abandoned Loretta's remains along the side of the Trans-Canada Highway. They then continued their journey to Ontario, believing they had gotten away with their crime. However, their freedom was short-lived. On February 18, just 5 days after Loretta had gone to collect her rent, police caught up with Leggett and Henneberry in Ontario. They were arrested while in possession of Loretta's car, and investigators found her bank card, identification, and cell phone with them. Meanwhile, Loretta's family was living through every parent's worst nightmare. She had been reported missing on February 17, and the search efforts were intensive. Her family knew something was terribly wrong because it wasn't like Loretta to simply disappear without contact. The community rallied around the search efforts, but for days, there were no answers about what had happened to the young woman who had been working so hard to make a difference in the world. During police interrogation, detectives knew that Victoria Henneberry would be easier to get information from than Blake Leggett. They confronted her with video evidence they had gathered, and after a long silence, she finally broke down. She admitted that Leggett had taken Loretta's life. She said the reason for this act was simply to avoid paying the rent they owed. After more pressure from investigators, Henneberry agreed to lead them to where they had left Loretta's remains. On February 26, exactly 2 weeks after Loretta had disappeared, her remains were discovered along the highway in New Brunswick. The news devastated her family and the entire community. The young woman who had been working to bring attention to violence against Indigenous women had herself become a victim of that very violence. The legal proceedings that followed revealed the full scope of the case and the defendant's lack of remorse. Initially, both Leggett and Henneberry entered pleas of not guilty. Their lawyers had pushed for separate trials, but the judge denied this request and ruled that they would be tried together. However, just as their trial was about to begin, there was a sudden and dramatic change. In April 2015, in a surprising turn of events, both defendants decided to change their pleas to guilty. Blake Leggett pleaded guilty to first-degree charges, which carried an automatic life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. Victoria Henneberry faced the same charge initially, but the Crown agreed to accept her guilty plea to second-degree charges instead. The agreed statements of facts presented to the court painted a picture of premeditation and callousness. Crown Attorney Christine Driscoll expressed satisfaction with the outcome, saying they were pleased for the family that they wouldn't have to sit through a lengthy proceeding and that people were taking responsibility for their actions. She felt the resolution was just. During the sentencing phase, the impact on Loretta's family became painfully clear. Her mother Miriam was devastated by what she saw as inadequate justice. She spoke about the unbearable pain of losing her daughter and questioned how Victoria Henneberry could receive only 10 years before being eligible for parole. She asked what kind of justice it was for a pregnant woman, describing her daughter as small and vulnerable, harmed by too much stronger individuals. The family's pain was evident as they struggled to understand how such a light sentence could be considered adequate. Leggett received the automatic life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. His lawyer explained that it was Leggett's idea to plead guilty because he did not want the Saunders family to go through the very grueling process of a public trial with all the evidence coming out over the following weeks. While this gesture may have been intended to spare the family additional trauma, it couldn't undo the immeasurable harm that had already been done. Victoria Henneberry was sentenced to life in prison, but became eligible to apply for parole after serving 10 years. The Parole Board of Canada has since granted her various forms of temporary release, including a controversial 30-day unescorted absence in 2024 to help her prepare for potential life outside prison. However, this decision was later revoked when Henneberry was found to have broken the rules of her release. The board noted her emotional instability and rule-breaking behavior, and when confronted about these violations, she was described as being dismissive. As recently as August 2024, the Saunders family continued to submit victim impact statements to the parole board, describing the ongoing trauma that Loretta's loss still causes for them. The case of Loretta Saunders became much more than a single tragedy. It became a catalyst for national change. In the aftermath of her death, along with other high-profile cases like that of Tina Fontaine, advocate groups including the AMI Next campaign pushed for a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. This pressure eventually led to the announcement of the inquiry in 2015, which was officially launched in 2017 by the Trudeau government. Loretta's academic work studying this very issue had taken on a profound and heartbreaking significance. Her family has worked tirelessly to ensure that Loretta's memory lives on in a way that honors who she was and what she stood for. They remember her as someone who was kind, caring, and resilient. Her father, Clayton, emphasized that she had overcome dependency and worked to make a difference in the world. They want people to remember that she was more than just a victim. She was a woman with dreams, ambitions, and a deep commitment to helping others. Loretta Saunders lost her life at just 26 years old, along with her unborn child, due to the actions of two people who valued avoiding a $600 debt more than a human life. Her story serves as a devastating reminder of the risks Indigenous women face, and her legacy continues through the important work that her loss helped inspire. The pain of her absence will forever remain with her family, who carry forward her memory and her mission to protect other Indigenous women from similar fates. The story of Tina Watson. Christina Mee Watson was just 26 years old when she lost her life due to the actions of her husband on what should have been the happiest trip of her young marriage. Born in West Germany on February 13, 1977, she came to America as a baby and was lovingly adopted by Tommy and Cindy Thomas on January 24, 1980. The Thomas family lived in Walker County, Alabama, with Tina's younger sister Alanda, before moving to Louisiana and then Birmingham. She grew up in a close-knit household where her father worked as an insurance agent and her mother provided a stable, nurturing environment. Tina was a bright, ambitious young woman who attended the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where she would meet the man who would ultimately become her husband and cause her tragic loss. David Gabriel, Gabe, Watson was a fellow student, and they began dating in January 2001. To those who knew her, Tina was a loving daughter and sister, described by family as someone who brought joy to every room she entered. She worked as a departmental manager at Parisian, a southern department store chain, and was known for her dedication and kind spirit. Despite being diagnosed with paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia, a heart condition that causes rapid heartbeat, Tina lived life to the fullest. In January 2003, with her wedding approaching, Tina made the decision to learn scuba diving. It seemed like an exciting adventure she could share with Gabe, who portrayed himself as an experienced diver. She earned her certification just before their wedding on October 11, 2003. By the time they married, Watson claimed to have completed 55 dives, while Tina had only completed 5. The couple planned an exotic honeymoon trip to Australia's Great Barrier Reef, a destination many divers consider a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Before their wedding, something troubling occurred that would later become crucial evidence. According to Tina's father, Tommy Thomas, Gabe had approached Tina about her life insurance policy. Thomas later testified that his daughter came to him shortly before the wedding, explaining that Gabe had asked her to increase her life insurance to $130,000 and make him the sole beneficiary instead of her father. The caring father told his daughter not to worry about it immediately and suggested she tell Gabe the changes had been made. However, the policy was never actually changed, leaving Tommy Thomas as the beneficiary. The newlyweds flew to Sydney for a week before heading to Townsville for their diving adventure. They booked a trip with Mike Ball Dive Expeditions aboard the vessel Sport to dive the wreck of the SS Yongala, a passenger ship that had sunk in 1911. The dive site was known to be challenging, with strong currents and depths of 30 meters, yet the couple chose this difficult location despite Watson's limited open ocean experience and Tina's complete lack of ocean diving. The dive company offered an orientation dive with a professional dive master, but both Watson and Tina declined this safety measure. On the morning of October 22, 2003, just 11 days after their wedding, the couple prepared for what would be Tina's final dive. Wade Singleton, the dive master who would later testify at Watson's trials, noted that the company had violated its own safety protocols. Tina should have received a private briefing and orientation dive due to her inexperience, but these crucial safety measures were skipped. When Singleton later testified, he admitted under questioning from defense attorney Brett Bloomston that he wasn't even aware Tina had never been in the ocean for an open water dive. At approximately 10:30 a.m., Tina and Gabe entered the water together. Within 2 minutes of beginning the dive, something went terribly wrong. According to Watson's account, which would change multiple times over the coming months, the currents were stronger than expected. He claimed Tina signaled that she wanted to return to the dive rope, and when they reached it, he noticed a worried expression on her face. Watson said she accidentally knocked his mask and air regulator loose, and by the time he recovered his sight, Tina was sinking too quickly for him to help her. But other divers in the water that day saw something very different. Stanley Stutz, who was diving nearby, witnessed Watson engaged in what appeared to be an underwater hold with his struggling wife. After this, Stutz watched as Watson headed for the surface while Tina drifted downward. Another diver, Gary Stempler, was taking photographs of his own wife when he unknowingly captured an image of Tina lying still on the ocean floor. This photograph wouldn't be discovered until weeks later when the film was developed. Watson surfaced and climbed aboard the Sport, alerting dive instructor Wade Singleton that his wife was in trouble. Singleton immediately descended and brought Tina back up after she had been underwater for 10 minutes. She was transferred to the adjacent dive boat Jazz II, where a doctor worked desperately for 40 minutes trying to revive her. Throughout this rescue effort, Watson remained on the Sport, not joining the attempts to help. Despite all efforts, Tina could not be revived. The following day, Professor David Williams, consultant forensic pathologist to the Queensland coroner, examined Tina's condition. Williams found clear evidence of air embolism, but no degenerative disease. He determined the cause of death to be drowning. When Williams later testified before the Alabama jury, showing autopsy photographs, Tina's father, Tommy Thomas, left the courtroom in tears, unable to bear seeing the evidence of what had happened to his beloved daughter. The unusual circumstances surrounding Tina's passing and Watson's conflicting statements immediately raised suspicions among Australian authorities. A coronial inquiry was launched, as is standard practice in Australia. Watson had already left the country by this point and declined to return, instead providing evidence through his lawyers. During the inquest, prosecutors presented evidence that Watson's story contradicted the data recorded by his dive computer. They suggested he may have turned off Tina's regulator and held her until she lost consciousness, then turned the air back on and allowed her to sink before surfacing. The investigation revealed troubling details about Watson's behavior following his wife's loss. When Tina was brought to the surface, Her regulator was still in her mouth, her tank still contained air, and tests showed no equipment malfunctions. Watson, who claimed to be a certified rescue diver, had made no attempt to inflate Tina's buoyancy control device or remove her weight belt, basic rescue procedures that could have saved her life. Crown Prosecutor Brendan Campbell noted that Watson had given police 16 different versions of what happened that day, none of which matched eyewitness accounts. Back in Alabama, Tina's family was struggling with their devastating loss. Her sister Alanda Thomas would later provide emotional testimony about Watson's behavior during this period. She recalled that Watson told her he wanted to claim Tina's personal belongings before the viewing at the funeral home. "He told me that I needed to realize that he had his time in Australia to grieve, and he was over the grieving process," Thomas testified, her voice breaking as she glanced at her former brother-in-law across the courtroom. Watson explained that he knew the Thomas family needed more time to grieve, but he had already moved past his sorrow. The funeral was held just 2 weeks after Tina's passing. Adding to the family's grief, Watson's actions regarding Tina's final resting place were deeply unsettling. After Tina was buried in Pelham, Alabama, Watson had her remains moved in 2007 to a different lot that he had purchased. When family members reported that flowers and gifts were repeatedly disappearing from the grave site, even when chained down, police installed surveillance cameras. The footage revealed Watson removing these tributes with bolt cutters and throwing them in trash cans. Watson later claimed he removed them because they were big, gaudy, plastic arrangements. Her grave remained unmarked until 2009, when Watson finally provided a simple foot marker. The legal proceedings began in Australia, where Watson was charged in connection with Tina's loss. On June 19, 2008, the Queensland coroner formally charged Watson with the offence at the site of the historical shipwreck Yongala. After resisting extradition for 6 months, Watson voluntarily returned to Australia in May 2009 to face trial. On June 5, 2009, in a surprising turn of events, Watson pleaded not guilty to the most serious charge, but guilty to manslaughter. Crown Prosecutor Brendan Campbell presented a compelling case, highlighting how Watson, despite being trained in rescue diving, had allowed his wife to sink to the ocean floor without making any serious attempt to save her. The prosecutor emphasized that Watson had failed completely in his duties as Tina's dive buddy, neglecting to share his alternative air source or take any of the basic rescue actions that could have prevented her loss. Watson was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison, but would serve only 12 months before being released. The lenient sentence outraged Tina's family, who called the 12-month term an embarrassment to Australia. Alabama Attorney General Troy King immediately lodged an appeal, and Queensland's Director of Public Prosecutions also appealed the inadequate sentence. The appeal was heard on July 17, 2009, with the Crown requesting an increase to 2.5 years. On September 18, 2009, 2 justices allowed the prosecution's appeal, increasing Watson's incarceration by 6 months to a total of 18 months. While Watson served his time in Australia, Alabama authorities were building their own case. In May 2010, Attorney General Troy King announced his intention to try Watson for capital charges and kidnapping, asserting jurisdiction based on the theory that the alleged crime was planned in Alabama. The kidnapping charge was particularly significant, as prosecutors argued Watson had deceived Tina into traveling to Australia with the intent to harm her. Key evidence emerged about Watson's possible financial motives. Cesar LaMonica, a manager at the store where Tina worked, testified that Watson had come in within a month of her loss, asking about a life insurance policy. However, the defense argued that Watson had no financial motive because Tina's father, not Watson, was the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. The prosecution maintained that Watson believed he would inherit substantial money, estimating the potential gain at over $200,000. Watson was released from Australian prison on November 10, 2010, and immediately deported to the United States, where he was arrested upon landing in Los Angeles. He appeared before an Alabama judge on December 15, 2010, requesting bail. Judge Tommy Nail set bond at $100,000, requiring Watson to wear a monitoring device, surrender his passport, remain in Alabama, and observe a sundown to sunrise curfew. When bail was granted, Watson's supporters in the packed courtroom rose and cheered, prompting Judge Nail to respond sternly. Sit down, sit down. This is not a spectator sport. On January 31, 2011, Watson appeared before Judge Nail to formally answer 2 charges: kidnapping Tina and taking her to Australia with harmful intent, and the scuba diving incident itself on the Great Barrier Reef. He pleaded not guilty to both charges. The trial was initially set for May 23, 2011, but was later moved to February 13, 2012, due to security concerns. As the Alabama trial approached, new evidence emerged that complicated the case. Colin McKenzie, a key diving expert who had initially maintained that a diver with Watson's training should have been able to bring Tina up, later retracted much of his testimony. After being provided with Tina and Watson's complete diving logs, certificates, and medical histories, McKenzie concluded that Watson should never have been allowed in the water as Tina's dive buddy. The expert revealed that Watson had received his rescue certification after completing only a 2-day course in an Alabama quarry, when it normally required 4 days. McKenzie ultimately stated he had no hope of being competent. He could barely save himself that day, let alone his wife. I don't believe he intended to harm her. Professor Michael Bennett, a leading expert in dive medicine, provided crucial testimony about Tina's fitness to dive. He noted that Tina had undergone heart surgery 2 years earlier to correct an irregular heartbeat, but had falsely stated on her dive application that she had never had heart problems or surgery. Bennett concluded that Tina was unfit to dive without clearance from a cardiologist. The Alabama trial began on February 13, 2012, with opening statements from both sides. Assistant Alabama Attorney General Andrew Arrington told the jury that the case was not just about losing a life, but losing a life for financial gain. He alleged that Watson had deliberately interfered with Tina's air supply and held her until she could no longer respond. He took her engagement ring as his last act of contact with her on this earth, Arrington dramatically told the jury. The prosecution showed jurors the underwater photograph taken by Gary Stempler, depicting Watson swimming to the surface while his wife lay motionless on the ocean floor. The prosecution's case, however, began to unravel almost immediately. Judge Tommy Nail made several crucial rulings that severely limited the evidence prosecutors could present. Most significantly, Nail ruled that evidence of Watson's behavior following Tina's loss was inadmissible. The judge also blocked Tommy Thomas from testifying about Watson's alleged attempts to increase Tina's life insurance, ruling the statement inadmissible as hearsay. Tommy Thomas did take the stand, providing emotional testimony about his interactions with Watson following Tina's passing. He told the court that Watson had given him conflicting accounts of what happened underwater. Initially, Watson told Thomas by phone that Tina had given him a thumbs-up signal, which he interpreted as wanting to surface. Months later, when Thomas asked why Watson didn't take her to the surface after the thumbs-up signal, Watson changed his story, claiming it meant she wanted to go to the anchor line. Thomas also testified that Watson had told him he was by Tina's side during revival efforts, and that he brought her back on the plane, contradicting what Watson told other witnesses. As Thomas left the stand, he looked directly at the jurors, though only a few met his gaze. Alanda Thomas, Tina's sister, provided testimony about Watson's unsettling behavior after the loss. She recalled the painful conversation about Watson claiming Tina's belongings and his statement that he was over the grieving process. However, Judge Nail severely limited her testimony, blocking most questions about Watson's actions and conversations as improper. The restrictions led to heated exchanges between the judge and prosecutors, with Nail pounding his desk and pointing at Assistant Attorney General Don Vailska, shouting, "You need to move on." When Vailska protested, Nail responded pointedly, "If y'all don't like my ruling, you know where Montgomery is," referring to the state's appeal courts. The prosecution's case continued to face obstacles as key evidence was ruled inadmissible. Prosecutor Don Vailska, who had 41 years of trial experience, later said this was the first time he had ever had a trial end in a judge's acquittal. Despite the setbacks, prosecutors pressed on, calling witnesses including Wade Singleton, the dive master, and medical examiner David John Williams. As the prosecution presented its case, it became clear that they were struggling to prove premeditation beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense, led by Brett Bloomston, argued that Tina's loss was a tragic accident caused by a perfect storm of circumstances, including inadequate safety procedures by the dive company, Watson's insufficient training, and Tina's undisclosed medical condition. On February 23, 2012, after the prosecution completed its case, Judge Tommy Nail made an unprecedented decision. Without the defense needing to present its case, Nail dismissed all charges against Watson, ruling that the state's evidence was sorely lacking. The judge determined that prosecutors had failed to prove that Watson had any financial motive for causing his wife's loss. Nail's acquittal meant that Watson was completely cleared of all charges related to Tina's passing. Tommy Thomas, devastated by the judge's decision, expressed his frustration with the outcome. "It should have gone to the jury for them to decide," he said, believing that 12 citizens should have been allowed to weigh the evidence and determine Watson's guilt or innocence. The Thomas family had fought for nearly 9 years to see Watson face a jury trial for their daughter's loss, only to have the case dismissed before the defense even presented their arguments. The tragedy of Tina Watson's passing extends far beyond the legal proceedings that followed. A young woman full of life and love lost everything due to the actions of the person who had promised to protect and cherish her forever. Her family's pursuit of justice, while ultimately unsuccessful in securing a conviction, brought attention to the dangers that can exist even in the most intimate relationships. Tina's memory lives on through those who loved her, and their courage in seeking answers ensures that her story will not be forgotten. The story of Margie Calciano. Margaret "Margie" Calciano was 30 years old when she vanished from her Brooklyn home on December 17, 1984. She was the beloved daughter of Joan Calciano, a devoted mother who lived in the close-knit Sunset Park neighborhood. The family wasn't wealthy, but they were loving, and Margie had been the light of her mother's life. Despite the challenges that came with growing up in Brooklyn during the tough times of the early 1980s, Margie had dreams and potential that her family believed in deeply. But Margie struggled with personal demons. Like many young people of her generation, she had experimented with substances, and this had become a source of constant worry and tension in the household. Her mother Joan watched helplessly as her daughter battled this issue, trying everything she could think of to help Margie find her way back to the bright, beautiful girl she had raised. The arguments between mother and daughter had become more frequent, more heated, as Joan's desperation grew and Margie felt increasingly trapped and misunderstood. On that cold December evening in 1984, another argument erupted between them. This time, it was about Margie's struggles, a conversation that had happened countless times before. But this time, something was different. The words were sharper, the emotions rower. Joan, overwhelmed with fear and frustration, did something she would regret for the rest of her life. In a moment of anger and desperation, she slapped her daughter across the face. The sound echoed through their small apartment, followed by a silence that felt like it lasted forever. Margie's eyes filled with hurt and fury. Without saying another word, she turned and walked toward the door. Joan called after her, but Margie didn't look back. The door slammed shut, and Margaret Calciano stepped out into the Brooklyn night, never to return home again. Joan stood in her apartment, listening to her daughter's footsteps fade down the hallway, not knowing that she had just seen Margie for the last time. The hours turned into days, and still no word from Margie. Joan contacted friends, family members, anyone who might know where her daughter had gone. She filed a missing persons report with the local police, but in 1980s Brooklyn, missing adults, especially those struggling with substances, weren't always treated as high-priority cases. Joan was told that Margie was an adult who had left voluntarily after an argument and that she would probably return when she was ready. But weeks passed, then months, and Margie never came home. Joan's kitchen table became a command center covered with flyers, phone numbers, and photographs. She called hospitals, shelters, and morgues throughout the city. She walked the streets of Brooklyn, showing Margie's picture to anyone who would look. Every phone call brought a surge of hope, followed by crushing disappointment. Joan promised herself that she would never stop searching, not until the day she died. Meanwhile, 130 miles away in Reading, Pennsylvania, a disturbing discovery was made along a quiet highway on December 21, 1984, just 4 days after Margie's disappearance. A woman's remains were found wrapped in a painter's tarp and left in a ravine beside the road. Investigators determined that the victim had been subjected to serious harm before losing her life, and the condition of the scene suggested she had fought desperately. The local police in Cumru Township, Pennsylvania, immediately began their investigation. They collected fingerprints and photographed everything, hoping to identify the victim quickly. But when they ran the fingerprints through the available databases, nothing came up. With no identification, no witnesses, and few leads, the case quickly grew cold. The woman was buried as Jane Doe in a local cemetery, with only a simple marker to acknowledge her existence. What the investigators didn't know was that this Jane Doe was Margaret Calciano, the missing daughter from Brooklyn. The fingerprints they had collected were indeed in the system, but the technology and databases of 1984 weren't sophisticated enough to make the match. So while Joan continued her desperate search in New York, her daughter lay in an unmarked grave in Pennsylvania, tended by a kind local woman named Mary Kalbach, who felt compelled to care for the unknown victim. Mary Kalbach had a daughter named Margaret too, and perhaps that connection drove her to visit the grave regularly, leaving flowers and ensuring that this Jane Doe wasn't completely forgotten. Mary organized fundraisers to give the unknown woman a proper burial instead of a pauper's grave, and she even had the funeral videotaped, hoping that someday the victim's family would be found and they could see that their loved one had been honored. 20 years passed. Joan Calciano, now 71, had never stopped looking for her daughter. The missing persons flyers had grown yellow with age, but Joan's determination hadn't wavered. She had moved apartments but stayed in Brooklyn, always hoping that Margie would somehow find her way home. The guilt over their last argument haunted her every single day. "I slapped her, and she ran out of the house. I never saw her again," Joan would later say through tears. "I have to live with that." In 2003, Detective Robert Warner of the Cumru Township Police Department decided to take a fresh look at the old Jane Doe case. Advances in forensic technology and expanded fingerprint databases meant that cases once considered hopeless might now be solvable. Warner was determined to give this unknown woman back her name and hopefully find her killer. He submitted the decades-old fingerprints to newer, more comprehensive databases, and this time he got a hit. The fingerprints belonged to Margaret Calciano from Brooklyn, New York. They were on file because of a minor substance-related arrest from years earlier. Detective Warner now had a name, but he still needed to find her family and confirm the identification. He entered Margaret Calciano and Brooklyn into his computer system, and hundreds of names appeared. He started calling them one by one, beginning with the first name on the list. That first call went to Joan Calciano. When Detective Warner asked if she had a daughter named Margaret, Joan's heart stopped. "Yes," she whispered. "Who's calling?" When Warner identified himself as a detective from Pennsylvania, Joan knew immediately that her worst fears were about to be confirmed. "I hate to tell you this, Miss Calciano," Warner said gently, "but we found your daughter in 1984. Joan's legs gave out, and she sank into her kitchen chair as the detective explained that her beloved Margie had lost her life due to the actions of someone 20 years ago. The next day, Detective Warner and his partner drove to Joan's apartment in Brooklyn. They sat around her kitchen table with family members and friends, showing photographs to confirm that the Jane Doe was indeed Margie Kalshina. Warner had to show Joan the evidence photos, which was heartbreaking for everyone present. But Joan needed to be absolutely certain, and she confirmed that yes, this was her daughter. After the identification was complete, Detective Warner asked the crucial question. Did Joan have any idea who might have been responsible for Margie's death? Without hesitation, Joan gave him a name, Peter Williams. She explained that Peter had been the last person seen with Margie on the day she disappeared, and that all of Margie's friends and family members suspected him. Peter Williams had vanished on the same day as Margie, which had always seemed suspicious to those who knew them both. Detective Warner now had a suspect, but finding Peter Williams after 20 years would be no easy task. Using Williams's social security number, Warner was able to track his movements over the decades. He discovered that Williams had been collecting welfare checks in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and had worked as a truck driver. Interestingly, one of his main trucking routes had been from Brooklyn to Wisconsin, which would have taken him directly past the area in Pennsylvania where Margie's remains were found. The investigation led Warner to Milwaukee, where he located Peter Williams, now 76 years old. When Warner approached Williams and identified himself as a detective investigating the death of Margaret Kalshina, Williams didn't deny knowing her. In fact, he admitted to being close to her, but he strongly denied taking her life. Williams seemed confident that there wasn't enough evidence to charge him after all these years. But Detective Warner had something Williams didn't know about. When he had reopened the case, all the physical evidence had been resubmitted to the laboratory for analysis using improved forensic technology. Hidden in the army blanket that had been wrapped around Margie's remains, scientists found a single hair. This hair contained enough DNA material for testing, and if it matched Williams, it would be the evidence needed to charge him. Williams, believing that his only risk was being connected to Margie romantically, willingly provided a DNA sample to Detective Warner. He thought he was clearing his name, not realizing he was sealing his fate. When the DNA analysis came back, it was a perfect match. The single hair embedded in the blanket belonged to Peter Williams. With this evidence, Detective Warner was able to obtain an arrest warrant for Peter Williams on charges of first-degree murder. Williams was arrested in Tucson, Arizona, where he had fled after the detectives visited him in Milwaukee. When they read him the probable cause affidavit, Williams saw the mention of the DNA evidence from the hair sample and realized that he had been caught. "I think that's what floored him," Detective Warner later said. "I think he realized that he had it at that point." Peter Williams was charged with first-degree murder and extradited back to Pennsylvania to face trial. Joan Kalshina was finally going to have her chance to see justice for her daughter. She had waited 20 years for this moment, and she planned to be in the courtroom every day of the trial. "I wanted to see his face in the courtroom," Joan said. "I wanted him to see me." She wanted Williams to know that Margie had been loved, that her family had never stopped looking for her, and that he would finally face the consequences of his actions. But Peter Williams would escape justice one final time. Just 1 month before his trial was scheduled to begin, Williams passed away in his cell from natural causes. He had been battling illness, and it ultimately claimed his life before he could face a jury of his peers. Joan Kalshina was devastated by the news. After waiting 20 years for answers and justice, she was denied the closure she desperately needed. "I felt I was cheated twice," Joan said through tears. "First, he took my daughter's life, and then he passed away before I could confront him. I wanted him to see my face, to know I would be there to witness him held accountable." Joan broke down and cried when she learned of Williams's death, not because she felt sorry for him, but because she felt robbed of the confrontation she had been preparing for during 2 decades of grief and anger. Without a trial, there would be no official verdict of guilty, no formal closure for the family. Even more troubling, because Williams had not been convicted, authorities were not allowed to submit his DNA profile to national databases. This meant that other police departments working on unsolved cases would never be able to cross-reference Williams as a potential suspect, and investigators would never know if he had harmed others. Detective Warner suspected that Margie might not have been Williams's only victim. During his investigation, he had discovered that Williams had previously lived in Milwaukee, where he had become obsessed with another young woman. When we found her, she recounted that he had attempted to strangle her, Warner said. The similarities between that incident and what happened to Margie were chilling, suggesting a pattern of violence against women. Despite the lack of a formal conviction, Margaret Kalshiana was finally able to come home. At Joan's request, her daughter's remains were exhumed from the Pennsylvania cemetery, where she had lain as Jane Doe for nearly 20 years. Mary Kalbach, the compassionate woman who had tended to the grave all those years, had passed away by then, but her kindness had not been forgotten. On December 9, 2003, 19 years after her disappearance, Margaret Kalshiana was laid to rest in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, just a few blocks from her mother's home. About 20 people gathered at St. John the Baptist Church in Brooklyn for a funeral mass that had been 2 decades in the making. A family friend addressed the small congregation, saying that Margie's mother never stopped searching for her daughter and that Margie was never alone, acknowledging the kindness of strangers who had cared for her even in death. Joan Kalshiana expressed her gratitude to everyone who had helped bring her daughter home. She was particularly moved by the people in Pennsylvania who had ensured that her daughter received a proper burial instead of ending up in a pauper's grave. "They made me feel good," Joan said. "I'm relieved she wasn't in a potter's field. There aren't enough words to express my thanks. They even provided me with a videotape of her funeral, hoping they would eventually find us." The service and burial brought a sense of closure to the family's prolonged anguish, though the pain of loss would never fully heal. "She's finally home," Joan Kalshiano said, as they lowered her daughter's casket into the ground. "That's all I ever wished for. I never imagined I would see this day, just to achieve closure." The Margaret Kalshiano case stands as a testament to a mother's unwavering love and the dedication of law enforcement officers who refuse to let victims be forgotten. Detective Warner's decision to revisit a cold case using new technology gave Joan Kalshiano the answers she had been seeking for 20 years, even if it couldn't give her the justice she craved. For 2 decades, Joan had lived with the terrible memory of her last interaction with her daughter, the argument, and the slap that sent Margie out into the night. While she would always carry that burden, she could finally know that her beautiful daughter was at rest, surrounded by love and remembered not as Jane Doe, but as Margie Kalshiano, a young woman whose life was cut tragically short, but whose memory would live on in the hearts of those who never stopped loving her. The story of Casey Woody. On October 17, 1989, Casey Renee Woody was born at Baptist Medical Center in Little Rock, Arkansas, to Rick and Christy Woody. She was a bright-eyed baby with a future ahead of her, surrounded by the love of her parents and 2 older brothers, Austin and Tim. The Woody family lived a peaceful life together, building memories that would later become precious treasures in the face of unimaginable hardship. When Casey was just 7 years old, on June 19, 1997, her world changed forever. The family was driving home from Tim's baseball game when an unexpected accident occurred. A group of horses had run loose onto the road, forcing Rick to swerve their vehicle. In the confusion, their car collided with one of the horses. The impact struck Christy, who was sitting in the passenger seat, and she tragically lost her life due to the actions of the accident. Rick, who had been driving, suffered broken ribs, but survived, as did the children. For young Casey, the loss of her mother left a void that would never be filled. Following Christy's passing, the family structure shifted dramatically. Rick became both father and mother to his children, working as a police officer in Greenbrier while trying to hold the family together. By 2002, Casey was 13 years old and living in Holland, Arkansas, with her father, her brother Tim, and Tim's friend, Eric Betts, who had become part of their extended family. Her maternal aunt, Teresa Paul, lived in the house next door and helped provide the maternal presence that Casey desperately needed. The memory of her mother's passing had left Casey with a serious distaste for horses, but the tragedy hadn't dimmed her natural brightness. Casey was enrolled at Greenbrier Middle School, where she flourished academically and socially. She was a member of the band, choir, and talented and gifted programs. Her teachers and classmates knew her as a very friendly and caring girl who was extremely close to her family and friends. Her hobbies included poetry, singing, dancing, and playing the saxophone. Many of her poems were dedicated to her mother's memory, showing how deeply the loss had affected her, but also how she channeled her grief into creative expression. The Woody home was situated in a heavily wooded rural area of Arkansas. Due to the remote location, many outgoing landline calls were billed as long distance, which created a financial burden for the family. To help Casey stay connected with her friends without the expense of phone calls, Rick allowed her to use instant messaging on the family's computer. She registered on Yahoo Messenger with the username Model Behavior 63 or Model Behavior 36, depending on which account she was using. What seemed like a practical solution to stay in touch with friends would eventually become the pathway for an online predator to enter their lives. As Casey became more comfortable with online communication, she began exploring chat rooms to meet new friends. On either New Year's Eve 2001 or around that time, she entered a Yahoo Messenger Christian chat room for teens. It was there that she encountered someone who claimed to be a 17-year-old boy named Dave Fajan from San Diego, California. The profile showed a long-haired surfer type, exactly the kind of boy that might catch the eye of a 13-year-old girl. But Dave Fajan didn't exist. Behind the carefully crafted persona was 47-year-old David Leslie Fuller from La Mesa, California. Fuller was a man with a troubling past that no one in his immediate circle suspected. Born in Salt Lake City, Utah, he came from a Mormon family of 6. He had married young at age 19, but the marriage quickly ended in divorce. In the 1980s, he married a woman named Sally, and together they had 2 children, a son and a daughter, 4 years apart. Fuller had served as a Navy Seabee from 1989 until 1999, when the family moved to La Mesa. It was around this time that Fuller began displaying concerning behaviors that would eventually lead to grooming of young girls online. What Casey believed was a genuine friendship with a teenage boy was actually a carefully orchestrated manipulation by an experienced predator. Fuller spent months building trust with Casey, learning about her life, her family, her interests, and her vulnerabilities. He crafted stories about his own supposed teenage life, sharing details that would make him seem relatable and trustworthy. The conversations evolved from casual chatting to more personal exchanges, and eventually to phone calls. Fuller was methodical in his approach, slowly building an emotional connection that Casey believed was mutual. During their online relationship, Fuller told Casey that he had an aunt who lived in Arkansas and was very ill. He claimed this aunt was dying and that he might need to visit her. This fabricated story was actually Fuller laying the groundwork for his eventual trip to Arkansas to deceive Casey. He was planning every detail while maintaining the facade of being a caring nephew worried about his sick relative. On December 2, 2002, Fuller checked into the Conway Motel 6 under his real name. He had booked the room for a week, specifically requested no maid service, and became agitated with staff when he couldn't connect to the internet from his room. The desk clerk later recalled that Fuller behaved strangely during check-in, repeatedly stepping outside to smoke while filling out his paperwork. His packed suitcase remained untouched in the room, and the bed was never slept in, suggesting he had no intention of staying long. Fuller also visited Conway Enterprise Rent-A-Car, where he rented a silver Dodge Caravan minivan. The employee who handled the transaction later told investigators that Fuller's behavior was odd and made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't specify exactly why. Unknown to everyone at the time, Fuller was finalizing preparations for what he had been planning for months. On the evening of December 3, 2002, Casey was home alone at the Woody house. Her brother Tim was at his college library doing research. Eric Betts was attending his electrician's class, and Rick was on duty with the Greenbrier Police Department. Even her Aunt Teresa was away, attending her daughter's basketball game in Conway. It was the perfect storm of circumstances that left Casey vulnerable and isolated. Casey spent the evening doing what many teenagers did in 2002. She was online, instant messaging with friends. She was chatting with her boyfriend Scott through Yahoo Messenger while simultaneously talking on the phone with Dave, the person she believed was her friend from California. During that phone conversation, Fuller told Casey that his aunt's condition had worsened and that he was driving to Arkansas to be by her side until she passed away. What Casey didn't realize was that Fuller was likely already in Arkansas, possibly even near her home. At 9:41 p.m., Scott noticed that Casey's instant messages suddenly stopped mid-conversation. This was unusual because Casey was typically very communicative online and would normally say goodbye before logging off. Alarmed by the abrupt silence, Scott continued sending messages, trying to alert anyone in the Woody household that something might be wrong. He also sent emails to their mutual friend Jessica and attempted to call the Woody house, but no one answered. When Eric Betts returned home from his electrician's class at approximately 10:15 p.m. Central Time, he noticed that Casey wasn't around. This didn't immediately concern him because he assumed she had gone to bed early or was out with family or friends. He continued with his normal evening routine, unaware that Casey was in danger. Tim returned home around 11:40 p.m. and went to check on his sister, only to discover that she wasn't in her room. Immediately sensing that something was wrong, he called his father Rick, who raced home in his police squad car. When Rick arrived, the scene inside the house told a troubling story. Casey's reading glasses, which she always wore when using the computer, were found with a missing lens. Her pet Yorkshire Terrier was limping, suggesting there had been some kind of disturbance. Most telling of all, the computer was still running with the chat window between Casey and Scott still open, showing her messages had stopped abruptly. Rick immediately began calling Casey's friends, but none of them had heard from or seen her recently. The evidence in the house, combined with Casey's sudden disappearance, led Rick to call for police backup. Either Tim or Eric then messaged Scott directly, learning about Casey's ongoing relationship with Dave and how she had suddenly stopped responding during their conversation. When police investigators arrived, they initially considered the possibility that Casey had run away from home. Rick immediately dismissed this theory, stating emphatically that Casey was happy with her life and would never leave the house without telling him first. He had spoken to her around 7:00 p.m. that evening when he called to check in, and at that time she had been practicing her saxophone. Everything had seemed completely normal during their conversation, with nothing to suggest she was planning to leave or was in any distress. The physical evidence at the scene contradicted a runaway scenario. All of Casey's coats and shoes had been left behind, while the temperature that night was close to 30 degrees F with rain. No teenager would voluntarily leave home in such weather conditions without proper clothing. This led authorities to immediately suspect an abduction, and they launched a massive investigation. The search effort was unprecedented for the small Arkansas community. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was called in, along with the Arkansas State Police and every law enforcement agency in Faulkner County. Police dogs were brought in to search the area, and dozens of volunteers joined the effort. At 5:14 a.m. on December 4, a Level II Morgan Nick alert was issued, named after another Arkansas child who had disappeared years earlier. Investigators seized the Woody family computer and began questioning students and staff at Greenbrier Middle School. Casey's friends told them about both Scott and Dave, providing crucial information about her online relationships. FBI agents also discovered discarded notes in Casey's trash container that contained both males' names, further confirming the friends' accounts. Scott's computer was quickly traced to his family's home in Alpharetta, Georgia. FBI agents visited the property, where Scott's mother answered the door. His parents were completely unaware that their son had a girlfriend named Casey, or even that he was communicating with someone in Arkansas. Once investigators determined that Scott had given his true identity online and was verifiably at home when Casey disappeared, he was completely cleared of suspicion. The focus then shifted entirely to Dave, who had told Casey he was driving from California to Arkansas. Investigators launched a comprehensive search of the local area for any clues about his location. Their breakthrough came at the Conway Motel 6, where they discovered a 1993 Buick Regal with California license plates. The vehicle was registered to David Fuller, who had checked in on December 2 and booked his stay for a week. When detectives searched Fuller's motel room, they found his packed suitcase, laptop computer, camouflage clothing, and rubber gloves. The bed clearly had not been slept in, indicating that Fuller had not actually been staying in the room despite paying for it. This discovery painted a picture of someone who was using the room as a base of operations rather than a place to rest. Further investigation led detectives to Conway Enterprise Rent-A-Car, where they learned that Fuller had behaved strangely while renting a vehicle. When they subpoenaed the rental paperwork, they made crucial connections. Fuller's phone number matched one that had been repeatedly dialed from the Woody home, confirming that he was indeed the Dave who had been in contact with Casey. He had rented a silver Dodge Caravan minivan, and his credit card had very recently been charged by a self-storage facility in Conway. With this evidence, Fuller was confirmed to be the Dave who had been communicating with Casey, and his status was immediately upgraded from a person of interest to the prime suspect in her disappearance. The storage unit became the focus of an intense search effort. Conway Police Sergeant Jim Barrett and 2 FBI agents arrived at Fuller's storage unit at approximately 6:00 p.m. on December 4. The metal door was pulled down, but had no lock securing it. When Barrett began to lift the door, they could see the silver Dodge Caravan minivan inside, positioned forward-facing with its engine still running. As Barrett started to enter the unit, a single gunshot rang out from inside. Law enforcement immediately ran for cover and called for backup, shouting commands for anyone inside to surrender. There was no response from within the storage unit, and no movement could be detected. For over 2 hours, police maintained their perimeter while waiting for SWAT teams to arrive, all the while commanding whoever was inside to come out peacefully. Finally, at around 8:30 p.m., the police and SWAT teams entered the storage unit. What they discovered inside was disturbing. On the concrete floor beside the still-running minivan lay 47-year-old David Fuller, who had ended his own life with a firearm upon realizing law enforcement had found him. The detectives then moved around to the back of the minivan, where they made a heartbreaking discovery. Inside the vehicle, Casey Woody had lost her life due to the actions of Fuller. Also found in the van were items suggesting she had been restrained, indicating how Fuller had likely controlled her during the abduction. Although Casey's exact time of passing could not be definitively determined, authorities concluded that she had been incapacitated for several hours before the storage unit was discovered, sparing her from experiencing the full extent of her situation. The investigation revealed the chilling timeline of events. Fuller had used his carefully crafted online persona to groom Casey over many months, building her trust and learning intimate details about her life and family situation. He had planned his trip to Arkansas meticulously, establishing a base at the Conway Motel 6 and renting the minivan that would be used in the abduction. On December 3, while Casey was home alone, he had somehow gained entry to the Woody house and taken her. Rick Woody later spoke about the devastating impact of losing his daughter. The police chief gave a public statement expressing how heartbreaking it was for a child to face such circumstances at such a young age, and his words echoed the sadness felt throughout the entire community. Rick shared how the first days after Casey's discovery were the most difficult of his life. "I spent 4 or 5 days where I couldn't even form a sentence," he said. The shock was so profound that he struggled to speak even to his other children. "I wanted to comfort them," he added, "but I couldn't even comfort myself." There was no trial in the traditional sense, because Fuller had ended his life before he could be arrested and prosecuted. However, the investigation that followed was thorough and comprehensive. Law enforcement worked tirelessly to piece together every detail of Fuller's actions and methods, both to provide closure to the Woody family and to understand how such a tragedy could be prevented in the future. The case became one of the first well-documented instances of an online predator using the internet to groom, abduct, and harm a victim. It exposed the vulnerabilities that existed in early online communication platforms and highlighted the need for greater awareness about internet safety, particularly for young people. Investigators' findings revealed Fuller's sophisticated manipulation techniques and the patience he exhibited in building trust with his victim over an extended period. In the aftermath of this tragedy, Casey's friends and family founded the Casey Woody Foundation, dedicated to educating parents and children about the dangers associated with internet communication. The foundation works to ensure that Casey's story serves as a warning to others and helps prevent similar tragedies from occurring. Through school presentations, community outreach, and educational resources, they continue to honor Casey's memory by working to protect other children. The impact of Casey's case extended far beyond her immediate community. It served as a wake-up call to parents, educators, and law enforcement agencies across the country about the very real dangers that existed in online spaces. The case highlighted the need for better monitoring of children's internet activities and more comprehensive education about recognizing and avoiding online predators. The loss of Casey Woody represents not just the end of a young life, but the destruction of unlimited potential. She was a talented, caring, and bright young girl who had already overcome the tragedy of losing her mother and was building a life filled with music, poetry, and friendships. Her story serves as a permanent reminder of the need for vigilance in protecting our children in an increasingly connected world. To the Woody family, and to all who knew and loved Casey, her memory continues to live on through the foundation established in her name and the countless lives that have been protected through increased awareness of online safety. Though her life was tragically cut short, her legacy continues to serve as a guardian for other children, ensuring that her bright spirit continues to make a difference in the world. The story of Rebecca Schieffer. She was born with so much potential. Rebecca Lucille Schieffer came into the world on November 6, 1967, in Eugene, Oregon, the only child of Dr. Benson Schieffer, a child psychologist, and Dana Schieffer, a writer and instructor who taught at Willamette University and Portland Community College. The family was close-knit, full of love and hopes for their daughter's future. Rebecca was raised in a household where education mattered, where faith played an important role, and where her dreams were nurtured from the very beginning. Growing up in Portland, Rebecca attended Lincoln High School and was raised in the Jewish faith. She was curious and spirited, a child who loved horseback riding and being outdoors. In high school, she was an honor student who served on student council and loved writing poetry. She was deeply immersed in her Jewish faith and initially even aspired to become a rabbi. But as she entered her junior year, something else caught her attention. Someone noticed her natural beauty and suggested she try modeling. Her father, Benson Schieffer, later said, "She was sort of a mystery because if she wanted to do something, she could do it. She really sort of learned by looking and doing, and it was easy." At just 14 years old, Rebecca began pursuing modeling and signed with local talent agent Nanette Troutman. She appeared in department store catalogs and television commercials, working as an extra in television films. The young girl was driven and ambitious, and when she turned 16 in 1984, she made a decision that would terrify and inspire her parents. With their permission, she moved to New York City by herself to continue pursuing a career in modeling. It was a frightening move for her parents, to be sure, but Rebecca was focused and mature for her age. In New York, Rebecca attended professional children's school and signed with elite model management. The fearless teen soon landed on the cover of 17 magazine, looking innocent and fresh-faced. She even secured a short-term role on the daytime soap opera Guiding Light. In late 1984, she landed the role of Annie Barnes on ABC's One Life to Live for a stint that lasted 6 months. During this time, she continued attempting to further her modeling prospects, but at 5 feet 7 inches, she was considered too short for high-fashion modeling and struggled to find work. In 1985, she moved to Japan hoping to find more modeling jobs, but still encountered difficulty due to her height and weight. She was too broke to afford a phone, so her agent would tape notes to her apartment door with updates about auditions and opportunities. Rebecca returned to New York City and decided to focus on an acting career. In 1986, she won a small role in Woody Allen's comedy Radio Days, but her character was edited out, except for one brief scene. She continued modeling and also worked as a waitress to make ends meet. But then came the breakthrough that would change everything. Her appearance on the cover of 17 magazine caught the attention of television producers who were casting for a new comedy called My Sister Sam, starring Pam Dawber. Rebecca won the role of Patricia Patty Russell, a teenager who moves from Oregon to San Francisco to live with her 29-year-old sister Samantha after the loss of their parents. The show was initially a hit, ranking in the top 25. Rebecca lived with co-star Pam Dawber during her work on the series, and it seemed like her dreams were finally coming true. Her father described her as beautiful and funny, saying, "She would have been a remarkable actress, but success in Hollywood can be fleeting." My Sister Sam was cancelled halfway through its second season in April 1988 due to falling ratings. After the cancellation, Rebecca had supporting roles in films including scenes from the class struggle in Beverly Hills, Voyage of Terror, the Achille Lauro Affair, The End of Innocence, and the television film Out of Time. She also served as a spokesperson for the children's charity Thursday's Child. What Rebecca didn't know was that during her time on My Sister Sam, someone had been watching her. Someone had been recording every episode, writing letter after letter, developing an obsession that would later have tragic consequences for Rebecca. Robert John Bardo was a 19-year-old high school dropout from Tucson, Arizona. He had previously been obsessed with child peace activist Samantha Smith, who passed away in a plane crash in 1985. After Smith's passing, his fixation shifted to Rebecca. Bardo wrote numerous letters to Rebecca, and she answered one of them. Her father, Dr. Benson Schieffer, perceived no threat in his correspondence, viewing it as the ramblings of a harmless admirer. It seemed like typical fan mail from a young person who admired her work, but Bardo's obsession was far from harmless. In 1987, he traveled to Los Angeles hoping to meet with Rebecca on the set of My Sister Sam. He arrived at the Warner Bros. Lot in Burbank, armed with flowers and a teddy bear, demanding to see Rebecca. But Warner Bros. Security turned him away. He returned a month later, this time carrying a knife, but security guards again prevented him from gaining access. Bardo returned to his native Tucson, and his obsession seemed to shift for a while towards pop singers Tiffany, Debbie Gibson, and Madonna. Rebecca was not the only young female celebrity he had targeted. He had attempted to locate Debbie Gibson, Tiffany, and Samantha Smith, but Rebecca was the one he was able to find. In a letter to his sister, he wrote, "I have an obsession with the unobtainable." In 1989, Bardo watched Rebecca in the black comedy film scenes from the class struggle in Beverly Hills, in which she appeared in a love scene with another actor. He became enraged by the scene, apparently out of jealousy, and decided that Rebecca should be punished for what he perceived as inappropriate behavior. He felt personally betrayed by seeing her in what he considered a compromising situation. Bardo had studied celebrity stalkers and even visited the apartment building where a deranged fan had taken the life of John Lennon. He learned that Arthur Richard Jackson had stalked and subjected actress Teresa Saldana to serious harm in 1982, and that Jackson had used a private investigator to obtain Saldana's address. Following this same pattern, Bardo paid a detective agency in Tucson $250 to find Rebecca's home address in California's Department of Motor Vehicles Records. Anthony Zinkas, the manager of the detective agency, later testified that Bardo said he wanted to send her a gift and showed him a black and white 8x10 photo of Rebecca. He said Rebecca might be somewhere in the LA area and that she had connections with the television business, Zinkas recalled. With the help of his brother, Bardo acquired a Ruger GP 100.357 revolver. On July 18, 1989, Bardo traveled to Los Angeles for the third time. He roamed the neighborhood where Rebecca lived, asking people if she actually lived there. Once he was certain that the address was correct, he rang the doorbell at her apartment on North Sweetser Avenue in West Hollywood. Rebecca was preparing for an audition for The Godfather part, I, and was expecting a script to be delivered, so she answered the door. Bardo showed her a letter and autograph that she had previously sent him. After a short conversation, she asked him not to come to her home again. He went to a nearby diner and had breakfast, then returned to her apartment an hour later. When Rebecca answered the door this time, she had a cold look on her face, Bardo later said. In that moment, the encounter turned tragic. He pulled out the handgun and discharged it, resulting in Rebecca losing her life in the doorway of her apartment building. The sound of the gunshot shook the entire building. Francois Leswood, a witness who lived across the street, was on the phone near his window when he heard a scream. I walked to the kitchen window and to the living room window, and I saw Bardo running out from the door across the street, he testified. Witnesses described Bardo as wearing flip-flop shoes and running funny in an effort to keep his shoes on his feet. At least 6 other witnesses testified that they saw Bardo leave the scene. Lynn Marta, who lived in an apartment down the hall from Rebecca, heard the shooting as she stood nearby. The door shook, the walls shook, she recalled. The cat went up into the air. I fell to my knees and crawled into the bedroom. Then I heard Rebecca's first scream. Marta called 911 after she heard the gunshot. She was still screaming while I was talking to 911, she said. By the time I got to the door, she was wailing. I opened the small hatch in my door. There was a smell I'll never forget, the smell of gunfire. It was quiet except for light moaning. Rebecca was rushed to the emergency room of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where she was pronounced deceased 30 minutes after her arrival. She was just 21 years old, full of talent and promise, with her whole life ahead of her. At the time of her passing, she was dating director Brad Silberling. Her loss would later influence his film Moonlight Mile in 2002, about a man's grief after his fiancée is taken from him. Tucson Police Chief Peter Ronstadt arrested Bardo the next day after motorists reported a man running through traffic on Interstate 10. He was attempting to end his own life when he was apprehended. He immediately confessed to causing Rebecca's passing. Bardo carried a red paperback copy of The Catcher in the Rye when he committed the act, which he tossed onto the roof of a building as he fled. He insisted that it was coincidental and that he was not emulating Mark David Chapman, who had also carried a copy of the novel when he took John Lennon's life on December 8, 1980. The case was prosecuted by Marcia Clark, who would later become known for her role as lead prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson case. Clark meticulously examined Bardo's confession, striving to decipher any inconsistencies. In the initial viewings of the videotape, taken at Men's Central Jail in downtown Los Angeles, she had an unsettling feeling that he was not telling the truth. She jotted down detailed notes, rewinding and rewatching the tape multiple times. During the month-long trial, the judge's order followed nearly 5.5 hours of testimony by 10 prosecution witnesses, most of whom said they either heard the gunshot or saw Bardo near Rebecca's apartment before or immediately after the incident. Bardo's defense attorney portrayed him as a victim of mental illness and neglectful parents. Renowned forensic psychiatrist Park Dietz testified for the defense, saying that Bardo suffered from schizophrenia and that his illness directly led to his behavior. Dietz also testified that Bardo harbored dreams of fame as a movie star, writer, or musician. Clark argued that Bardo had acted with premeditation and that he had not been under the influence of any command delusions when he committed the act. She believed that Bardo's actions were calculated and planned, not impulsive. He came from Tucson with a gun. How credible is it that he was genuinely provoked in that moment, she argued. During his trial, Bardo claimed the U2 song, Exit, was an influence on his actions, and the song was played in the courtroom as evidence, with Bardo lip-syncing the lyrics. On October 30, 1991, Superior Court Judge Dino Fulgoni found Bardo guilty of first-degree aggravated actions that ended Rebecca's life. In comments before he announced the verdict, Fulgoni said evidence showed that Bardo planned the act and may have even consciously ambushed Rebecca after she answered her doorbell. Bardo, wearing a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, sat rocking in his chair at the defense table while the judge announced his decision. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was ruled out in the case after Bardo agreed to waive his right to a jury trial. As the 21-year-old high school dropout was led from the courtroom, Rebecca's boyfriend, Bradley Silberling, walked up to him and called him a coward. Then Rebecca's mother, Dana Schiefer, who had sat with her husband, parents and friends in the courtroom every day of the month-long trial, leaned forward and said, "You will have to live with your guilt for the rest of your life." Outside the courtroom, her husband, Benson Schiefer, told reporters the verdict was appropriate. "What else can we say?" He added, "I feel that Rebecca will not come back to us as a result of the verdict, but justice was done." Rebecca was buried at Ahavai Sholom Cemetery in Portland, Oregon. Shortly after her passing, Pam Dawber and her My Sister Sam co-stars Joel Brooks, David Norton, and Jenny O'Hara reunited and filmed a public service announcement for the Center to Prevent Handgun Violence in her honor. Impact of Rebecca's case extended far beyond the courtroom. As a result of this incident, federal law regarding the release of personal information through the DMV was changed. The Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which prevents the DMV from releasing private addresses, was enacted in 1994. Rebecca's case also helped prompt the 1990 passing of America's first anti-stalking laws, including California Penal Code 646.9. The case served as a catalyst for California legislators to pass the nation's first stalking laws, which inspired similar legislation across the country and the world. The LAPT also established a threat assessment unit, and the private threat assessment industry experienced rapid growth. Looking back on the Rebecca Schiefer case, Clark reflects on the limited understanding of stalking in 1989. "What struck me about the case is the naivete of everyone involved," she said. "No one grasped the severity of this guy's obsession." In 2007, while incarcerated at Mule Creek State Prison, Bardo was subjected to serious harm when he was stabbed 11 times by another inmate with an improvised blade. He survived. Rebecca Schiefer was a young woman with incredible potential whose life was cut tragically short by someone who believed his obsession gave him the right to control her fate. Her story serves as a lasting reminder of the devastating impact of stalking and the importance of taking threats seriously. Though her time was brief, Rebecca's legacy lives on through the laws that now protect others from the same fate, ensuring that her loss was not in vain. Our thoughts remain with her family, who lost a beloved daughter, and with all those whose lives were touched by her bright spirit during her 21 years on this earth. The story of Alexandria Lowitzer. Alexandria Joy Lowitzer was the kind of teenager who could brighten any room she walked into. Her friends called her Arlie, and to those who knew her best, she was a natural artist with a voice that could captivate anyone who heard her sing. At 16 years old, Arlie was everything a parent could hope for in a daughter. She was responsible, caring, and had dreams that stretched far beyond her small hometown of Spring, Texas. Arlie lived with her mother, Joanne Lowitzer, in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names and children played safely in front yards until the streetlights came on. She was deeply involved in Girl Scouts, loved playing softball, and spent countless hours crafting with her mom. These weren't just hobbies for Ali. They were passions that defined who she was becoming as a young woman. Her artistic talents were evident in everything she touched, and her singing voice was something that made her family beam with pride. Like many teenagers, Ali was eager to gain some independence and earn her own money. In early 2010, she had just gotten her first job at the Burger Barn, a local fast food restaurant located about a quarter-mile from her home. The job wasn't glamorous, but Ali approached it with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else in her life. She was reliable, showed up on time, and was already making plans for what she would do with her paychecks. Ali's relationship with her mother was especially close. Joanne later described her daughter as someone who was always where she said she would be. If Ali said she would be home by a certain time, she was home. If she said she was going somewhere, that's exactly where you would find her. This reliability would become crucial later, because it meant that when Ali didn't come home, her mother knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. The morning of April 26, 2010, began like any other Monday for the Lowitzer family. Ali got ready for school, gathered her books, and prepared to face another day as a sophomore at her high school in Spring, Texas. She had no way of knowing that this ordinary Monday would be the last day anyone would ever see her. At school that day, Ali went through her normal routine. She attended her classes, talked with friends between periods, and looked forward to the end of the school day like any other teenager counting down the minutes until freedom. Her best friend, Savannah Sky, would later remember their final interaction with heartbreaking clarity. As their school buses prepared to leave that afternoon, Ali and Savannah shouted their usual goodbye to each other. "I love you. See you tomorrow." It was a daily tradition for the two girls, but neither could have imagined it would be their last conversation. At 2:25 p.m., Ali boarded her school bus for what she thought would be a routine ride home. The bus route was familiar, winding through neighborhoods she had known for years before reaching her stop at the corner of Notting Post and Low Ridge Road. As the bus approached her stop, Ali called her mother to ask permission for something that seemed perfectly reasonable. She wanted to walk to the Burger Barn to pick up her paycheck before coming home. Joanne gave her permission without hesitation. It was a short walk from Ali's bus stop to the restaurant, maybe a quarter of a mile through a neighborhood where Ali had walked many times before. There was nothing unusual about the request, nothing that would have raised any red flags for a mother who trusted her responsible daughter. At exactly 2:44 p.m., surveillance footage from the school bus captured Ali stepping off at her usual stop. She was wearing a white t-shirt and a grey hooded sweatshirt, carrying her multicolored checkered backpack and her blue slide cell phone. She looked like any other teenager heading home from school, perhaps a little excited about picking up her first real paycheck. At 2:57 p.m., Ali sent her final text message. Her phone, which typically racked up thousands of text messages each month because she was always chatting with friends, fell silent. This sudden silence would later become one of the most troubling aspects of her disappearance because Ali's phone was practically attached to her hand. The quarter-mile walk from Ali's bus stop to the Burger Barn should have taken no more than 10 or 15 minutes. The route was straightforward, essentially a straight line through a residential area that led directly to the restaurant. But Ali never made it to her destination. When 5:30 p.m. arrived and Joanne Lowitzer returned home from work, she expected to find Ali there, probably counting her paycheck or talking excitedly about her day. Instead, she found an empty house. At first, Joanne wasn't overly concerned. Maybe Ali had decided to stay at work for an extra shift, or perhaps she had stopped by a friend's house. But as the evening wore on and Ali didn't return her mother's calls or text messages, that initial calm began to transform into worry. Joanne knew her daughter's patterns, knew her reliability, knew that Ali always answered her phone. By 9 p.m., When Arlie still hadn't responded to multiple attempts to reach her, Joanne drove to the burger barn to check on her daughter. What she discovered there sent a chill through her entire body. The restaurant was closed, and Arlie was nowhere to be found. Worse yet, when Joanne spoke with Arlie's manager, she learned something that made her heart stop. Arlie had never shown up for work that day. She had never picked up the paycheck she had been so eager to collect. Joanne immediately began calling Arlie's friends, hoping that maybe her daughter had decided to spend time with someone and had simply forgotten to check in. But one by one, each friend confirmed the same thing: they hadn't seen Arlie since school. No one knew where she was. By 11 p.m., with panic fully setting in, the Lowitzer family reported Arlie missing to the Harris County Sheriff's Office. But their nightmare was just beginning, because for the next month, law enforcement classified Arlie as a runaway. Despite her family's insistence that Arlie would never run away, despite the fact that she had left behind everything she would need if she were planning to leave voluntarily, authorities maintained that she had probably left on her own. Arlie had left behind her contact lenses, which she needed to see clearly. She had left behind her phone charger, meaning her phone would soon die even if she had wanted to use it. She had left behind money, clothes, makeup, and that uncashed paycheck she had been so excited to collect. Most telling of all, she had left behind her entire life, her family, her friends, her job, her dreams. Joanne fought tirelessly to convince investigators that her daughter hadn't run away. She knew Arlie better than anyone, and she knew that disappearing without a word was completely out of character. It's very atypical of her to not be where she said she was going to be, Joanne would later explain. But for weeks, her pleas fell on deaf ears. Finally, after a month of being classified as a runaway, Arlie's status was changed to endangered runaway, though she still wasn't treated as a true missing person case. Frustrated by the lack of official response, the Lowitzer family took matters into their own hands. On the advice of the Girl Scout Council, which Arlie had been a member of, Joanne reached out to the Laura Recovery Center. The Laura Recovery Center, founded by Bob and Gay Smither after their own daughter Laura was abducted and lost her life due to the actions of another, specialized in helping families of missing children. They provided the support and expertise that the Lowitzer family desperately needed. With their help, organized searches began, flyers were distributed, and Arlie's story started reaching a wider audience. As the investigation slowly gained momentum, several leads emerged that would take the case in unexpected directions. In 2012, a private investigator hired by the Lowitzer family identified a potential suspect, Brandon Lavigny, a convicted offender who had caused the loss of life of 2 women in Louisiana. Lavigny's white truck had been spotted in the Spring area around the time of Arlie's disappearance. A witness had even reported seeing a young girl talking to someone in a similar truck near the burger barn, and had managed to note part of the license plate number, which matched Lavigny's vehicle. The connection seemed promising. Lavigny had family ties to the Spring area, and his truck had been found burned out 50 miles from town. But when police questioned him about Arlie's disappearance, he was able to provide an alibi that was verified through his former employer. Another lead had reached a dead end. The Lowitzers then hired a second private investigator, Amber Kamak, who believed that Arlie might have become a victim of trafficking. This theory suggested that Arlie could be anywhere in the United States, hidden away and forced into a life of exploitation. It was a horrifying possibility, but one that couldn't be ignored. In November 2012, Amber was contacted by a police informant named Amy, who claimed to recognize Arlie from a photograph. Amy said she remembered the scar on Arlie's forehead and even knew her by the nickname Arlie Cat. In exchange for money, Amy offered to take Amber to a house where Arlie was allegedly being held. The lead took them to Columbus, Ohio, where Amber reported seeing a girl who resembled Arlie. However, she had no way to access the girl or confirm her identity. The information was shared with law enforcement, and in December 2012, Arlie's parents flew to Columbus, hoping beyond hope that they were about to be reunited with their daughter. A plan was developed with local police to rescue Arlie from the house where she was supposedly being held. In January 2013, the plan was executed. Amber entered the house wearing a wire while a SWAT team waited nearby. When police moved in, several arrests were made and 8 girls were rescued from what appeared to be a trafficking situation. But Arlie was not among them. It's believed that her captors may have been tipped off about the raid beforehand. The failed rescue attempt was devastating for the Lowitzer family. They had come so close to what they thought might be answers, only to face another crushing disappointment. But even in their grief, they took some comfort in knowing that 8 other girls had been saved, even if their own daughter remained missing. Years have passed since that day in Columbus, and Arlie Lowitzer remains missing. Her case has been featured on numerous true crime podcasts, television shows, and websites. Her mother, Joanne, has become a tireless advocate not just for her own daughter, but for all missing persons. She has learned to navigate social media, started Facebook pages, created websites, and never stopped sharing Arlie's story. Although it's been 10 years, we're no closer to finding Arlie today than we were the first day, Joanne said in 2020. But we still have just as much hope in our hearts as we did 10 years ago. Now, more than 14 years later, that hope continues to sustain her. The impact on Arlie's family has been profound and enduring. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about her, said John Lowitzer, Arlie's father. I'm thinking, have we done everything that we can do? What's the next step? What can we do next? Joanne describes it as ambiguous loss, a piece missing from her heart that won't be filled until her daughter is found. Arlie's best friend, Savannah, still carries the weight of that final goodbye. I want her to be found today, tomorrow, the next day, she said. I don't want to go another year without having Arlie. The case remains active with the Harris County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Investigator Craig Thomas has assured the family that they haven't given up. We're going to chase the clue down and see if we can resolve it, Thomas said. If it's not her, let's move on to the next one. Let's go back through the case file and try to find something that somebody might have missed. Over the years, Arlie's story has highlighted the challenges faced by families of missing persons, particularly when cases don't receive immediate media attention. When the Gabby Petito case garnered national headlines in 2021, Joanne Lowitzer spoke honestly about the mixed emotions it brought up. There are so many emotions that come with it when you see, from my shoes, another missing person case. Different thoughts, feelings of jealousy, you know. Why did my daughter not get this much attention? But she also expressed hope that increased awareness of missing persons cases might eventually help bring Arlie home. Today, Alexandria Joy Lowitzer will be 30 years old. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has created age progression images showing what she might look like now. Her family continues to believe she is out there somewhere, waiting to be found. They've never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, never stopped fighting for answers. Arlie's disappearance serves as a reminder that in an instant, a normal day can become a family's worst nightmare. A routine walk to pick up a paycheck became a mystery that has consumed more than a decade of her family's lives. But it also demonstrates the power of a mother's love and determination, showing how Joanne Lowitzer has refused to let her daughter be forgotten. Don't sit and wait, Joanne advises other families facing similar situations. You've got to take action yourself. You've got to start looking for your missing loved one yourself, and I can't stress enough that there are people out there that care and will help you. Just don't sit there and wait. Alexandria, Arlie Lowitzer, was a talented, loving, responsible young woman with her whole life ahead of her. She was an artist, a singer, a daughter, a friend. Her disappearance has left a hole in the hearts of everyone who knew her, but it has also created a legacy of advocacy and hope. Her family's tireless efforts to find her have brought attention to countless other missing persons cases and have shown that love never gives up, even when faced with the impossible. Arlie's story continues, and somewhere out there, her family believes she is waiting to come home.